Hey guys, welcome back to Star Wars Canon. It's time for our in-depth look at the 4th episode of the Book of Boba Fett. If you haven't seen the previous 3 videos in this series, I'll throw a card in the top right corner so you can check those out. And I'll say from the outset that this episode was solid. And it's a good thing too, because frankly, after that 3rd episode, a lot of us were worried that the show was going downhill. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, let's get to it. The episode starts with a flashback to Boba's adoptive tribe was massacred in the previous episode, and this seems to have spurred him to action. He goes to Jabba's palace and scopes the place out, trying to see if he can sneak in and reclaim his ship, the Slave One. That night, he makes camp and sees a flare in the distance, which is actually the flare that Mando shot to blind Fennec Shand back in Season 1 of The Mandalorian. I remember when that episode first came out, and we got that little scene at the end of the episode where someone was seen approaching the unconscious Fennec. If you listen carefully, you can hear what sounds like spurs. Amazingly, that was all it took for some fans to realize that this was the return of Boba Fett. In Empire, when Vader surprises Han, Leia, and Chewie on Bespin, Boba enters the room and you can hear the same sound of spurs. At the time, lots of people said this was a huge logical leap to infer that the unseen person was Boba, but apparently not. Talk about attention to detail. Anyway, Boba realizes that Fennec is dying, so he takes her to the mod parlor, hoping they can save her. I think Boba sees himself in Fennec, another bounty hunter who was left for dead on the sands of Tatooine. The Tuskens saved him, and he can honor their memory by paying it forward to Fennec. As they approach the mod parlor, we get another glimpse of the dreaded Vespa speeders. We won't talk any more about that, though. There's a cool sequence where they're able to save Fennec, but there's really not much more to discuss here. Once Fennec wakes up, Boba calls her by name. He knows who she is, even though he's still living that Tusken life without any advanced tech. Then, she asks who he is. Unfortunately, there's a big missed opportunity here. Fennec has been in the bounty hunting game since the Clone Wars. That much is made crystal clear in the Bad Batch. She should immediately recognize Boba's face and voice as being those of a clone. As soon as she saw him, she should have said something like what Bo-Katan said in The Mandalorian.
This armor belonged to my father.
Don't you mean your donor?
Careful, princess.
You are a clone. I've heard your voice thousands of times.
Mine might be the last one you hear.
This brings up a really interesting point. How many people in the galaxy have put together the fact that Boba Fett is actually a clone? There were literally millions of clones, and surely somebody's recognized that Boba looks and sounds exactly like them. In the past 3 episodes, we talked a lot about how often Boba has been removing his helmet. Maybe he never took it off in the original trilogy because people would recognize him as being a clone, and that would draw unwanted attention. But at this point, maybe people are finally starting to forget about the clones. The first clones were grown in 32 BBY. That's the same year as the Phantom Menace, and BBY just means before the Battle of Yavin. And the Book of Boba Fett is set in 9 ABY, or 9 years after the Battle of Yavin. So the oldest clones would be 41 years old at this point. And because the Kaminoans genetically engineered them to age twice as quickly, they would be 82 years old physiologically. The youngest clones were created around the time of Attack of the Clones, which is 10 years after the Phantom Menace. So they'd be about 20 physiological years younger. So Boba is 41 years old, and all the other clones are essentially between 62 and 82 years old physiologically, meaning people are much less likely to mistake Boba for a clone at this point, since they all look significantly older than he does. This whole little discussion brings up another question that I really hope gets answered in Season 2 of The Bad Batch. What happened to all the clones when the Grand Army of the Republic was reinvented as the Imperial Army? We know that stormtroopers were trained by clones, but the clones seem to have virtually disappeared by the time of the original trilogy. So where'd they go? The oldest clones would be 82 years old physiologically, and the youngest would only be 62. There should still be plenty of them walking around during the original trilogy, The Mandalorian, and the Book of Boba Fett. Boba tells Fennec that he needs her help to get back his fire spray. That's the model of his ship. Specifically, it's a Fire Spray 31 class patrol and attack craft, of which only 6 were made, and Jango actually destroyed the other 5. So his is the only ship like it in the galaxy. The ship itself was given the name Slave One by Jango Fett. There's been some controversy regarding the name of Boba's ship since Disney acquired the franchise. They seem very reluctant to use the ship's name. Often it's only referred to as Boba Fett's starship on toys and in video games. Honestly though, I can't understand why. In Legends, Jango's family was killed by Death Watch, which led him to fight against them with the true Mandalorians, led by Mandalore. When his entire squad was wiped out by Death Watch and the Jedi, Jango, the sole survivor, was sold into slavery. After eventually making his escape, Jango found and killed the remaining members of Death Watch and their leader Tor Vizsla, not to be confused with Tar Vizsla, who was the first Mandalorian Jedi and the creator of the Darksaber, but that was nearly 1,000 years before Jango Fett. This marked the end of the Mandalorian Civil War, after which Jango turned to a solitary life of bounty hunting. At this point, he named his ship Slave One as a reminder of all that he'd overcome. The name Slave One shouldn't be anything controversial. It's a memorial to Jango's past. And that's your daily dose of Mandalorian history. Boba and Fennec then scope out Jabba's palace using a sweet little probe droid that she keeps in the stock of her blaster rifle. Boba tells her, "I'm gonna kill that bloated pig that double-crossed me. Take his throne." This line won't make any sense if you don't keep up with the comics. Bib Fortuna never double-crossed Boba in the movies or the TV shows. However, in the canon comic War of the Bounty Hunters, the carbonite-frozen Han Solo is stolen from Boba as he's on his way to Jabba's palace. It becomes clear that Bib Fortuna hired other bounty hunters to steal Solo from Boba and even placed a price on Boba's head. Boba tells Fennec, "I'm tired of working for idiots who are going to get me killed." This line hits even harder when you realize that he's probably talking about Jabba's sail barge disaster as well as Bib Fortuna trying to have him killed. When Boba and Fennec sneak into the kitchen of Jabba's palace, we see a familiar droid from Return of the Jedi. This droid is called EV-9D9. Under Jabba, she was in charge of all of the droids in the palace, including 8D8, who's now working as Boba's assistant. As a fight breaks out, we get a great callback to General Grievous when the chef droid starts spinning his butcher knives like lightsabers. There's another nice callback to the Clone Wars TV show when the LEP droid shows up. LEP droids got their name from the word leporine, which is from the Latin word for rabbit, which makes sense given this guy's big ears. We see these droids several times throughout the Clone Wars, including the episode with the blue shadow virus on Naboo. Also, I love that the LEP droid shuts itself off when Boba finally catches it. It's kind of dark, actually. At this point, they break into the hangar and have to fight off a bunch of Fortuna's guards to get away with Slave One, which looks amazing, by the way. It's a great fight scene, but there's really not too much more to discuss at this point. Once they recover Slave One, Boba tells Fennec that her debt is paid and asks where he should drop her off. She asks where he's headed, and he says that he's got a few scores to settle, to which she responds, "I'll go for the ride." And this is where we get one of the show's greatest scenes. Slave One is seen sneaking up behind the Kintan Striders. That's the Nikto speeder gang that allegedly massacred Boba's Tusken tribe. And before they have any clue what's about to happen, the fire spray earns its name by absolutely decimating the entire gang. So epic. Honestly, this is what most people were expecting out of this show. Immediately after wiping out the Niktos, they head to the Sarlacc pit in search of Boba's armor. Honestly, I don't know why Boba thinks his armor would still be there. It's been almost 5 years since he crawled out of the Sarlacc. No way is it still just chilling there. We get some epic shots of the maneuverability of Slave One as Boba puts them face to face with the Sarlacc. This whole fight with the Sarlacc was epic, and the way Fennec finally killed it with a seismic charge was perfect. By the way, I'm convinced that this is the greatest sound in all of Star Wars. That night, Boba and Fennec are sitting around a campfire when Fennec asks him, "Are you serious about forming your own house?" His reply is great. "How many times have you been hired to do a job that was avoidable if they only took the time to think? How much money could have been made? How many lives could have been saved? I'm tired of our kind dying because of the idiocy of others. We're smarter than them. It's time we took our shot." Then he tries to recruit her. "I can offer you something no client ever has. Loyalty. I'll cut you in on the success and pledge my life to protect yours." Fennec tells him that life with the Tuskens has made him soft. "No, it's made me strong. You can only get so far without a tribe." George Lucas has said repeatedly that Star Wars is a family story. Check out the deep dive we did on this topic when we went over episode 2, card in the top right corner. Then we see Boba kill Bib Fortuna and take his seat as daimyo of Mos Espa. And the flashback ends. This is the last flashback in the show, and Boba's servant droid tells him that he's completely healed when he emerges from the bacta tank. Fennec enters the room, and Boba asks if the mayor's major domo's talking. You'll remember that in the last episode, he led the mods on a slow speed chase through the city, to which she responds, "Oh, he's singing like a Yuzzum." Yuzzums are a species that's native to the forest moon of Endor, just like the Ewoks. In fact, they were actually meant to be a big part of Return of the Jedi alongside the Ewoks, but they ended up being too expensive to make, so they were cut from the film. However, when George Lucas released the special editions back in 1997, he added a musical number in Jabba's palace where the lead singer, Joe Yowza, was a Yuzzum. Anyway, all this to say that the Major Domo is apparently spilling his guts to Fennec. Boba then decides that he needs to show his face in town to reassure them that even though the mayor's fled, he hasn't abandoned the city. He gets to the sanctuary just in time to see Krrsantan lay into a group of Trandoshans. As far as I know, these specific Trandoshans didn't do anything to Krrsantan, but Trandoshans were known for being slavers and, in particular, enemies of the Wookiees. So, he decides to slap him around and rip a few arms out of sockets. And that's something we've been waiting to see a Wookiee do since Han Solo told 3PO that they have a tendency to do just that back in A New Hope. Boba approaches Krrsantan as he leaves the sanctuary and offers him a job. When we went over the second episode of this show, we talked a lot about how Boba and Krrsantan have actually worked together quite a bit before. Again, card in the top right corner. Boba then calls a meeting between the three families who ruled Mos Espa under Bib Fortuna and Jabba: the Aqualish, the Trandoshans, and the Klatooinians. All the while, Krrsantan can be seen lurking menacingly in the background. Probably the guy to have on your side, the guy who's just ripping off the arms of some of the people at the table. Boba asks for their help in ridding Tatooine of the Pikes and their spice operation. They deny his request, stating that the Pikes have really only threatened Boba's territory, not theirs. To this, Boba says that he will take on the Pikes alone, but he requests that the three of them simply remain neutral. They all find this acceptable. The episode ends with Boba and Fennec looking out over the departing families from the palace's tower. Boba believes that the three families will stay out of things since they'll always act in self-interest. Fennec then asks him how many credits they have, and Boba says that they've got plenty. To that, Fennec suggests they hire some extra muscle. The camera pans out as the Mandalorian's theme is heard playing. Overall, this was my favorite episode to date when it aired. The action scenes are amazing. We see why Slave One is known throughout the galaxy as being one of the deadliest ships in existence. We see the Sarlacc get wiped out by a seismic charge, and we see the end of Boba's flashback does. As we've gone through these first 4 episodes, I've really tried to show why Boba has become, quote-unquote, a good guy. This was the aspect of the show that turned many people off, but after watching these episodes again and making these videos, I'm actually a fan of this new daimyo version of Boba Fett. Sure, he's not as ruthless and cold-blooded as his portrayal in the Clone Wars in the original trilogy, but that's character development. He's become something more than just a vicious bounty hunter, though it doesn't take much to bring that side out of him, as we saw in The Mandalorian, when he blew away the Kintan Striders. So what do you think of Boba's transformation? Do you like it, or not? Do you think the first 4 episodes have given enough justification for this big change from a ruthless bounty hunter to a merciful daimyo? Let me know in the comments below. I'm really excited to go over the next episode where we get to see Mando in all of his dark saber-wielding glory. Keep an eye out for that video in the next few days, and I'll see you then. Thanks guys, and may the Force be with you.